Good afternoon, everyone. My name is CK Hoffler, and I have the honor and distinction of being the president of the National Bar Association. And I say it's an honor because we are living amidst 3 pandemics, and the National Bar Association has taken the lead. Our lawyers have taken the lead in addressing these pandemics. Today's webinar is focused on police brutality and the need for police reform and this earth-shattering settlement in Breonna Taylor's case. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, when we have within our midst giants in the industry, whether it's Clarence Williams, who is a retired police chief of Riviera Beach and who has had almost 40 years of experience in law enforcement at the top levels, retired lawyer as well. Whether it's Clarence Williams, who is co-chairing our police brutality task force with none other than Daryl Parks, who is past president of the UBA, who you also see on TV fighting the fight on behalf of those families who have been affected by police misconduct, egregious police misconduct, or whether we have the extraordinary Vice President of the National Bar. Yes, she is extraordinary. And that would be Lonita Baker. Lonita Baker was lead counsel in the case and this incredible settlement for the family of Breonna Taylor. Or whether we have our very own co-counsel of Lonita Baker, Ben Crump, past president of the National Bar Association. Each of these trailblazing lawyers and leaders, not just in their locality, in the country and in the world, are going to chat with you today about police brutality, the need for reform, and in the case of our extraordinary Vice President, Lonita Baker, and our past President, Ben Crump. They're going to talk about this groundbreaking, internationally recognized settlement on behalf of Breonna Taylor's family. So I salute each and every one of you. People don't want to hear from me, they want to hear from you. And I just want to say to each and every one of you who I know personally, who I love, Clarence is my brother, Lonita is my co-counsel and sister, Ben Crump, brother Omega Psi Phi, my children to the day I die. Daryl Parks, what can I say about Daryl Parks? An alpha man, extraordinary lawyer. I've known you all for years. It gives me such pleasure and pride to bring this panel together, extraordinary panel, because we are showing the world that it's the National Bar presidents that are leading the way in social justice. So against that backdrop, I'm going to start with you, Clarence Williams. Again, he's the retired police chief of Riviera Beach, an extraordinary lawyer. People don't know that you once also practiced law. And one of the reasons why, and we need someone to mute out there, there we go. One of the reasons why, Clarence, we're gonna call you chief, we wanted you to co-chair this task force is because we felt lacking from all the efforts was a perspective from law enforcement, from an informed law enforcement, from someone such as yourself who's taken extraordinary positions on reforms publicly. Also, that incredible op-ed piece that you read. So tell us why there's such an incredible need for police brutality reform, and from a law enforcement, having been law enforcement and led the way in one of our great cities in Florida, Riviera Beach. What can you tell us about that, Chief Williams?
Thank you so very much, Madam President, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to serve your administration. You are an extraordinary lawyer and person, and my 2 nephews, I understand, are doing quite well on the gridiron. So don't forget me when they sign that pro contract.
We won't. You'll be right there with them.
Police reform is and has become the topic of discussion throughout the country, of course, and we throw around that word reform. And for me, I try to talk about what that means, because in my 40+ years of law enforcement, I've seen this story before. Law enforcement has become so astute at repelling the external boundary scanning mechanisms, that is, our questions into how it is doing its business. It's become so astute at repelling those that we now find ourselves not even in a position to ask the right questions in order to bring about the changes that are necessary. So from my perspective, and I applaud progressive police chiefs who try to do the right thing, but it is difficult. It becomes challenging because of the political influences that are asserted on those police chiefs who want to do the right thing, who try to do the right thing, but then find themselves confronting labor organizations and even elected officials who receive monies and funds from those labor organizations, standing in the way of their ability to be able to monitor and develop and shape and include community in the formation of law enforcement policies and practices. So from my perspective, I approach it this way. I call it a three-leg stool, with the seat of the stool being reform. Now, the concept of a three-leg stool is that each leg has to sit level. If it doesn't sit level, then it's not going to be a very functional stool. So the three legs of police reform, as I see them, are the laws and standards by which law enforcement operations and policies are created, i.e. use of force policies and the laws and standards that protect the way you see those being applied now. That's one leg of the stool. The second leg of the stool is what I call accountability. Right now, we have lost civilian control of the Army. We've given law enforcement this awesome grant of authority. Law enforcement is the only entity, the only segment of the criminal justice system that's able to take a life instantaneously. But with that awesome grant of authority comes review. The industry has become astute at confusing and compounding and frustrating our abilities, our efforts to review what it is that they do. Also under the accountability leg of that would be things like the national database, things like reallocating funding of different police functions. The third leg of the stool, as I see it, is training. And it's that leg where, fortunately, and unfortunately, because it's out of balance with the other legs in that we don't approach or don't address them, is the training aspect of it. And in the training, we have all of those areas like the no-knock and the de-escalation and body cams and those things. All of those are training. And what happens in the training area, because many of those are stroke of a pen kinds of activities, very administrative, a lot of law enforcement agencies will say, hey, we're already doing those things. Well, what I'm suggesting and what I'm saying is very necessary for us to have complete and comprehensive police reform is for us to address all three of those areas. Because guess what? Capturing an incident on body cam and using that to prosecute, using that to bring about justice for an aggrieved family and individual is great. But at the end of the day, that same action that caused that activity that was captured on camera, unless we address those other areas, those other two areas, legs of the stool, if you will, is going to repeat itself. So I would suggest that those approach, and it's a heavy lift in many of those areas, but it's going to be a necessary one if we're going to have comprehensive and complete criminal justice, law enforcement reform in this country.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to pick up on a couple of points that Chief Williams made. And Lonita, I'd like to start with you. One of the things I just got to mention, I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of Ben. I'm proud of Daryl, you all on the front lines. But when I see another woman in this space, I must applaud you, because we know that with this type of work, the sacrifice is great. And so I have to applaud you as being that leader, and you're young. I talk about I'm your age, but the reality is I am not your age, even though I talk that I'm your age. But you are one of our leaders under 40 at the National Bar, Vice President, for you to be on the front lines of this fight and to have taken this on, to have represented this family in such a stellar way. We applaud you and salute you. So let me ask you, Lonita, about something, picking up what Chief Williams said, the police unions, the resistance of the police unions, and the need for accountability, and some of the things that you encountered as one of the people who first met the family. It's my understanding, and if you could share with the audience how you first got into contact with Breonna Taylor's family, and some of the resistance that you encountered with the police unions, and the fight for those not to be held accountable for this heinous crime.
Yes, thank you, President Hoffler. And first, I want to apologize. I hope you guys can't hear my background. I was in court and had to pick, you know, how we have to do, pull off to the side of the road and run into a restaurant to be ready for this webinar. So I do apologize in advance if you guys hear any background. But the family reached out to me on, Breonna was killed on a Friday, and on Saturday, this was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I get a phone call from my law partner, Sam Aguiar. He was in Florida at the time, and he says, hey, the family of the young lady that was killed yesterday is gonna reach out to you, and I need you to meet with them. And so I met with them. First, I'll preface by saying the only thing that we saw on the news on March 13th when Breonna was killed was a news story that said, police officers shot while executing a high-risk search warrant, one suspect dead, one suspect in custody. That was the extent of any news coverage of Breonna's killing for quite some time. And so I met with the family, when they reached out. It was Tamika Palmer, Breonna's mom, her aunts, and Breonna's sister, Janiyah. And in talking to them and getting to know about the person that Breonna was, and hearing about some of the things that they had learned overnight, I realized quickly, I am a former prosecutor, former criminal defense attorney, so I have interacted with police officers for the majority of my career, legal career. So I recognized pretty quickly that something had went wrong as it relates to Breonna. And so, we got involved in the case early. Sam and I, when he got back from Florida, we investigated Breonna's apartment. I took an investigator with us. It was the apartment, the scene, it was very disturbing. When I say, you hear us talk about it looked like a war zone, but I don't think people realize there were bullet holes in the dishwasher, in cabinets, Pop-Tarts had been shot. A bullet barely missed a furnace, in closets. They were all over the apartment. And so when we say that they were recklessly firing into Breonna's apartment, we really do mean that. Bullets went into neighboring apartments. And that's one of the big issues I hear, along with the lies on the search warrant. So there was a search warrant. I know there's some misconceptions about whether it was for her apartment. There was a search warrant for her apartment. But to get that search warrant for her apartment, the detective had lied on the search warrant. So you have that issue with the perjury presented to the court on the search warrant, but you also have the issue with the reckless shooting that caused Breonna's death. And both criminal and civil, we were gonna help the family pursue all avenues of justice. And I'll leave some for my co-counsel to jump in, or if you have additional questions, but I know the question was, how did we get involved? So that was the beginning of it.
Well, certainly, thank you so much for that. And yes, we are now going to Ben Crump. One of the things that we applaud and that we do so well at the National Bar Association is we team up. We team up with people who have been there, who have done that, and sometimes who have a high profile because they have been there and they know they have built a reputation nationally and internationally. And the beauty of having such a robust organization that represents the interests of 66,000 plus lawyers, judges and law students and jurists is that we do have access to a past president, and that would be Ben Crump and Daryl Parks, and in this case, Ben Crump. And Lonita did reach out to Ben Crump. And I think it is that partnership that distinguishes us at the National Bar, where we work together collaboratively, and we never forget the bridge that brought us over. And of course, that bridge is the National Bar Association. So Ben Crump, I'd like you to comment a little bit. Lonita Baker talked a little bit about the civil, that she was determined to represent the family and to help the family both from a civil perspective and from the criminal perspective, understanding that the criminal perspective, that's the state. That's not something that we as civil lawyers can do or can prosecute. There's an entity, a state entity that prosecutes, or a federal entity. But on the civil side, that's us. So if you could kind of share with the audience how you got involved. We know Lonita made the call to you, and the differences in how, as trial lawyers, we can help on all fronts to bring about justice for a family when you have this atrocious abuse of power by law enforcement.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I first want to acknowledge the great leadership that you and your Chief of Staff, Akua Carpet, displayed at making this robust panel with these giants in the legal profession. I'm partial to Daryl Parks because we, you know, so much of it was trying to establish the blueprint on this social justice back with Martin Lee Anderson, Trayvon Martin. As Dick Gregory once told me, you know, Crump, you all made civil rights law cool again, because there was a time when it was in vogue and then everybody just started going for the money. But with Trayvon, yeah, I got people rethinking, maybe I want to be a civil rights lawyer. And so I give all the credit in the world to my law partner who, as I was out there doing all this stuff, civil rights stuff, he was trying to figure out how to make sure we made money. So he was the great managing partner. And to Chief Williams, Fract, it's good to have the law enforcement perspective with us Black lawyers and judges, because I do think we're all together. And President Hoffler, it was deep because just last week, the Black Police Officers Association of Wisconsin reached out, and they're going to make a bold statement on behalf of Jacob Blake Jr. And who better than them to know the perspective of what is appropriate and inappropriate, other than somebody who's worn the badge and carried the gun. And I remember with Trayvon, Daryl, it was the NOBLE, National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, who were the first people to speak out and say that Trayvon Martin killers should be arrested. Nobody else nationally had done that. Daryl and I was just beating the drums. And then before I get to my answer, what can I say about Lonita Baker? It has been such a pleasure working with this gifted, articulate, beautiful sister who at every step of the way always reminded us that it's always going to be about Breonna. And I echo, Black women have to get the respect and the recognition that everybody else gets. And then her beloved Louisville. I done learned so much about Louisville hanging out with Lonita Baker, and she desperately is concerned about healing her community. So at one level, she was fighting, we were fighting for justice for Breonna Taylor, but at the other level, she was thinking about how do we heal the community. And that's what you saw in this historic settlement, not just with the $12 million, which is significant for so many reasons, because it represents one of the largest pretrial settlements ever entered into in a wrongful death by a police shooting of a Black woman in America. And I understand it's one of the largest of a Black person in America and one of the largest in general. But it sets a precedence now when you think about, oftentimes Black women have been marginalized and disrespected by society and in the court of law. And so when you think about the Sandra Blands of the world, when you think about who only got $1 million, you think about Ayanna Stanley, that little 7-year-old girl who was killed in a no-knock warrant raid in Detroit with a TV film crew documenting it and how nobody was convicted, but her family only got $1 million. And you think about Natasha McKinney, who people often forget, CK, that was the sister in Virginia who was in her underwear. They had a t-shirt and panties on in jail, and they tased her 11 times and killed her, and it was captured on video. She only got $1 million. And so this number helped raises the value to say that Black women lives matter too. And that was so outstanding what Lonita Baker and Sam Aguiar and I was able to accomplish working with the city of Louisville. And I give the leadership credit because it was a big thing for them to do in pre-trial. And then even more significant than that was the reform. And Lonita really can talk about that a lot because I know she lived it. Many nights we talked about the reform. She kept going down there. I was the bad guy, the outside agitator, her former boss and city county attorney. We got into it, boy. We were going at it. And so Lonita was the person being the good cop to bring us all together and everything. But it was those reforms that were so important to the mother and family of Breonna Taylor, because it was far more important than the money. Because she said, Clarence, this was about helping define the legacy of Breonna Taylor. And she said, incumbent in that legacy was to make sure we try to prevent future Breonna Taylors from happening. And as Lonita articulated so beautifully and passionately, when we passed the Breonna Taylor law and this reform that Lonita would get in detail, I would do it, but I want to give her the glory because she was so passionate about it. And that is, Breonna was an EMT frontline person. She wanted to be a nurse. And it's so appropriate in her life that she was about the mission of saving lives. And even in her death, her legacy would be she's still saving lives with Breonna Taylor's law that abolished the no-knock warrants and all these systematic reforms, this structural change that can be a model for other cities, whether George Floyd in Minneapolis, Trayford Pellerin in Lafayette, Louisiana, Dijon Kinsey in Los Angeles, California, Daniel Prude in Rochester, New York, Drayshawn Reed in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I'm just talking, CK, about cases that happened in the last 5-6 months during the COVID-19 pandemic, because I keep saying on every interview of people who will listen, since our president and attorney general don't believe we have systematic racism, that while America is dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, we in Black America are not only dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, we're also dealing with the 1619 pandemic that represents the year the first enslaved Africans were brought to America. And from that time to this time, 401 years, we have been dealing with systematic racism and oppression where they are killing us outside the courtrooms and inside the courtrooms softly. And that's why there's such a need for a National Bar Association and our great leaders to stand up for our people, to speak up for our people and fight for our people, like Daryl Parks and Lonita Baker and Clarence Williams, and especially you, President Hoffler. Now more than ever, our people have to have us standing up for the Breonna Taylors, and more importantly, the unknown Breonna Taylors. And I can't tell you in conclusion, at least for this statement, how important it is that we uplift Black women, not only Breonna Taylor, but also Lonita, because she showcased just how talented Black women lawyers are. And it's so appropriate that we continue to do that. And thank you, Black women, for your great leadership.
Well, there's an amen to that. Amen to that, Brother Crump. Thank you for that. And Lonita, that's why I start off by saying that you have no idea the impact that you've had on so many young women, young lawyers, and by the way, lawyers who are not so young, that you had the courage and you did it so beautifully, and that you were able to be the lead in architecting and designing and helping to put together the law and the police reforms. That is just magnificent. And that, when we talk about making history in this country, that is making history in this country. And I'm going to ask Daryl Parks.
President Hoffler, if I can, one thing I want to, since Ben talked about it being one of the largest settlements of Black women in the nation, I do want to point out that it's the largest individual settlement by the city of Louisville, regardless of race. So while we talk about in America, but in the next closest settlement in the city of Louisville, individual settlement was 8.5 million. So we can say, you know, but in Louisville, Kentucky, that was the largest.
And I would just point out how significant that is, only because I know when Lonita and Sam and I first started talking, it really was a question, would anybody care? I mean, people were not really caring. And so part of this is always about fighting in the court of public opinion, using whatever influence we have to try to find a way to make people care that Black lives matter. And you know.
Absolutely, and you all succeeded. And this is an example of why Black lawyers must stand up to fight. And so Daryl Parks, I want to turn to you, and Lonita, we're going to come back to the policing reforms in more details. And then I would like you and Clarence Williams to have a dialogue. Clarence, you from law enforcement perspective, and Lonita from the person who was the main architect, of course, with the help of your team, Ben Crump and others. I'm going to have you all have that dialogue. But Daryl Parks, I know that you are co-chairing this police brutality task force, and you too have been on the front lines, as Ben Crump has said, with a lot of these cases. I remember you all fighting this way before Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin is perhaps what gave you all some national and international notoriety. But before Trayvon, there were many cases. And Daryl, I know you've testified on the Hill. You've done so much, and you are an expert in this area. That's why I wanted you to chair this committee along with our other expert, Chief Williams. Can you talk to us a little bit about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act? Because what Lonita Baker and her team have accomplished here is really in part on a state or local level is what the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is trying to accomplish as well. So can you talk a little bit about that and also intertwine in that your experience in fighting these cases?
So let me address your question first. So the George Floyd and Policing Act, I think one of the things that we're trying to do within the task force in your leadership is to at least make sure that the dash cam and body cam aspect of that bill passes, along with the qualified immunity issue that's embedded in it. Now, there are other issues that are embedded in there, but as the bar, we've identified that those are two issues that could be game changers for lawyers who do what we do. That's the answer to your question. Now, Lonita and I started having a conversation as she was taking on this Breonna case and bringing Ben on. We started talking about Ben coming on and helping because they had an issue with publicity. I told her I thought Ben would be great to deal with that issue. So that's how Ben and Ben owes me Ben. He says he's gonna pay, but we'll see. Then, but the thing that Lonita them did very early on in this case that she needs to tell the lawyers on here and the judges, there were several very important things they did very early on. Number one, Lonita, tell them about the lawsuit that you filed. And the interesting thing about the lawsuit is you didn't include any federal counts. You went with Kentucky state-based counts and what that meant. That's the first question. Then the second question for you is the fact that there was no criminal case pending meant that the court that you was before could not stay or abate you. And so that meant that you could keep going forward. Then lastly, address the creative thing that you were able to do within the discovery that you were allowed since the case was going forward. I think those are real important key points that the practitioners and judges and lawyers on here will understand, that all of those things played a big role in y'all being able to get, they talk about, yeah, it went fast, but it went fast because y'all were going fast. So if you'll take them down that road a little bit, I think it'll give people a lot of perspective of how y'all got to this settlement in the way you did.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, Past President Parks, you are correct. We made the decision strategically to file in state court, and we were strategic to make sure that we didn't put any federal claims in our complaint because we didn't want it removed to federal court, because we know that's the first thing that the government is going to seek to do. So yes, you know, with 1983 cases, you get your attorney fees if it goes to verdict, and there's reasons that you would file, you know, under 1983 and get it in federal court. And eventually, if we did not settle, we would have ended up in federal court for various reasons. However, we wanted to be able to get discovery as soon as the parties were served. So from the moment that all of the defendants were served, we began to fire off subpoenas to the city of Louisville immediately. We were very aggressive in sending out those subpoenas. We were because things that prior to filing suit, we were trying to get things through open records requests. The city was denying those open records requests under the guise of there's a pending public integrity unit investigation, so we can't disclose this to you. So we needed information, and we wanted it. We didn't want to wait. We wanted to get information to experts immediately. So we were requesting things like cell phone location data, because we knew we didn't have all of the officers that was present. We subpoenaed the public integrity unit file once we knew that they completed their portion and had tendered it to the Attorney General's office. So it was various things that we were able to get through the subpoena process. Now the city and the Attorney General, the FBI, they did try to quash us, our ability to get that information by saying, you know, if it was released publicly, it could harm the criminal investigation. The judge said, you know, we're going to give it to him, but she did put us under a protective order. So there's a lot of things that, you know, Sam, myself, Ben are privy to that are still not public knowledge at this point because of that protective order. Even though we settled the civil suit, one thing we don't want to do on behalf of our client is interfere with any criminal investigation. We want these officers prosecuted. My criminal law experience knows that there's sufficient evidence to indict them. And so, you know, but as soon as we can, we plan to be, you know, upfront and with the public and let them see the information that they've been requesting too. So we were very aggressive in getting discovery. We could not, and we conceded that we would not try to take the officer depositions because, Daryl, you're correct. If we had tried to take the depositions, we would have risked the judge staying the case because they would have said, you know, we're at risk of criminal charges. We have a Fifth Amendment right, and it would have put a stay. So we said we would not try to take their depositions. The only thing we wanted was information from the city of Louisville. Of course, we could not sue the city of Louisville because of sovereign immunity here, but the officers were sued in their official capacity. So the city of Louisville itself was not an actual party to the case.
I have a question for Ben also. Ben, I got a question for you. So y'all, you heard Ben draw an analysis between how we've been down here fighting in the South in these poor canals, getting $1 million here and there, never getting significant dollars. Ben, explain to the people what made the mood differently in Louisville that changed the conversation in a whole different realm than what we were normally used to, and most people are used to around the country, especially in the South.
Okay, and I just want to make a comment. Do you know how past President Parks has become the moderator? I love it. Go ahead, Ben. Just took over, just asking all the questions, but I love it. That's why we're in family. Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
Hey man, you can't take Oprah's role.
I just had to throw that in there.
And now, Daryl, this is part of the comment I was about to make too. I want to go on the record. I need to know how I feel. I don't think it was enough. And me and the city attorney, we really were going at it. And I love Lonita, Sam, and I. We were strategic about it. Every week, it got worse for the city of Louisville. Mm-hmm. And Lonita was very concerned about her city burning and so forth, and rightfully so. You know, Daryl, I only know one way, just push the envelope. And it's kind of deep because I think they did try to devalue her life. And the fact that we had them caught, that there was an issue with them lying to get the judge to sign the warrant based on the misinformation on the probable cause affidavit. The fact that, you know, we had this whole issue about gentrification that they said, not Lonita, they just said me and Sam was crazy, talking about the mayor was gentrifying the neighborhood and this part of the reason. So it was a lot of reasons it kept getting worse. The fact that all our friends there, whether Reverend Al, Tamika Mallory, you know, Senator Kamala Harris, everybody who I called, you know, after we explained it to them, they did it. Well, half of them did. Half of them waited till it got popular. You know, they played it safe. But, you know, with most of these cases, they don't do it. And it's kind of deep because the mayor, and literally, Lonita, I see he reached out to me. He, I guess, getting pushback, and he needed us to try to say, hey, they tried to do the right thing. And when they try to do the right thing, we got to help them. But they always got to be pushed, because when I think about the white woman in Minneapolis who they gave $20 million to, and she was shot in a dark alley, CK, Clarence, I mean, if it was a black person, they wouldn't have got a penny. But because a person of color, an Ethiopian police officer killed this white woman, they gave her $20 million. We kept using that as a reference point. We used some other things that we have going on confidentially, Daryl. And you know how we do when we talk about other cases to influence this case. And so I thought Louisville knew that it was going to keep getting worse, because what Lonita and I kept saying, every week it's going to get worse. And it would get worse that next week. And I borrowed Lorenzo Williams' old line, do we want to hold hands together and navigate this landmine, or do we want to run out in the landmine by ourselves and say, every man for himself and God for us all? And it was the question, Lonita, how many times I said that? Either we're going to be allies or we'll be opponents, and it don't matter to us. I looked this guy in the face, and I was like, hey, we are ready. We on the right side of history. And we kept saying that and pushing the envelope. So I think that's how we got the number to raise, because it literally kept getting worse. And when the president of Churchill Downs reached out to me, I knew that all their powers to be in Louisville were talking about this matter.
Well, thank you. And you know, it's the old adage, pay me now or pay me later. And I'm glad that you mentioned Lorenzo Williams. I want to recognize Willie Gary and Lorenzo Williams and that dynasty in Stuart, Florida, because they were always on the front lines before we were even born. Willie Gary and Lorenzo Williams were prosecuting cases like this on behalf of the least of these. So we owe them a debt of gratitude, each of us on this panel. So I want to get back to Chief Williams. When you hear the discussion that Ben, Crump, and Daryl and Lonita are the discussion that they're having relative to law enforcement and holding accountable, and the ways, the strategies that can be used from the standpoint of law enforcement, what insight can you give to those practitioners who are listening to this, and in terms of how they should move to come to an amicable resolution, if it can be, from the standpoint of law enforcement? We know that the detractors and the people who are trying to prevent it are the police unions. So what light can you shed from having been law enforcement on the other side of some of these cases? What can you tell us about that? You have to, you're muted, so we have to. There we go.
Thank you. It's going to involve what these two lawyers have demonstrated, and that's the willingness to take on the status quo, the willingness to take on those powers to be that are looking for a different outcome, or an outcome that does not provide justice. Law enforcement and law enforcement practitioners respond politically, and we can't be afraid to use and flex, that political muscle in order to hold those persons accountable. We can't be afraid to go into the court of public opinion in order to move the needle. Because what happens in situations like the situation in Louisville is that for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. And we do well, we respond, we react well, but the powers to be have learned to wait out our initial reaction, and then we see the reaction. And the reaction comes from labor unions and those who will create the narrative that you're either with law enforcement or you're against law enforcement. And that is not what we're challenging at all. What we are saying is that law enforcement has lost the faith, or the faith has been lost of 30% of its customer base. And that's across the board. So you have an industry where 30% of your customers don't trust what it is that you're doing, don't trust your product. And that 30% crosses all economic stratas. And they're saying, we're unhappy with what you're doing. If this were a private business, you wouldn't be in business, because you can't have 30% of your customer base dissatisfied. The transition for us is to regain, and the challenge for us is to regain accountability. We have to regain civilian control of the Army. We have to call for public discussions of union contracts. What happens with police union contracts is that those deals are cut between, or I don't want to say cut, strike cut. The negotiations are had, oftentimes in closed sessions involving just a limited number of persons involved in government and the union. They reach an agreement. That agreement is presented to the policymakers, generally the board of commissioners or city council, and they often just rubber stamp the results of that. Well, embedded in that are all those rights and challenges that Ms. Baker runs up against and Mr. Crump runs up against each and every time they try to get information from law enforcement. So reach out, support police chiefs who are trying to do the right thing, because unions will come after them if they don't readjust their thinking. And so those guys have to know that there is support out there for them, and many of them will do the right thing and will assist with coming up with and fashioning remedies that will be satisfactory across the board.
Wonderful. Okay, well, that I have to tell you, Chief Williams, we have a question. We have many questions from our audience because people are really, really interested in this panel and what you're saying. And I'm going to start with one question that has to do with the settlement amount. First of all, they want to give congratulations to Ms. Baker and all others involved in such a favorable and rightfully deserved, I'm reading this, settlement for the family of Ms. Taylor. My question is, when a settlement amount is determined, it all comes down to assuming a dollar value for someone's life. How did you even begin to go about determining such value, and what other factors or go into determining the settlement amount? So the one of the viewers and one of the people tuning in, participants, wants to know, how did you get to that figure and what were the factors? We know that Black lives aren't valued the same as other lives, as white lives. So when you were in the trenches, and I'll pose a question to Lonita and then Ben, also please join in. What were the factors that you considered most important when you were determining the value of Breonna Taylor's life and what amount you would accept?
And Lonita, I wouldn't get into it so much.
I know that. One thing I want to say first and foremost is there's no way to value the loss of someone's life, especially in this manner. So the 12 million, honestly, when you talk about it, Ms. Palmer was not driven by money in this settlement. So it's not necessarily a value on life. But when we talk about civil litigation and trial litigation, there's some things in every case that we're going to look at. We got pain and suffering. You know, in Kentucky, we can only do the pain and suffering for the amount of time that, you know, we think that she lived from the time that, you know, she was first injured to the time that she died. So, you know, we have, it could have been up to 6 minutes. They probably would have gotten an expert at some point that would have said that she died, you know, very quickly. We had an expert do the loss of earnings, and in Kentucky, we do not have a discount for loss of future earnings. So when the expert, you know, looked at where Breonna was in her current employment, what her goals were, and made a reasonable assertion of what she would have made had she continued to live, had she not been killed on that day, and how long would she have lived. And then, you know, in the settlement amount, you just get to negotiate. And punitive, you get the argument of if it was a jury trial, there would have been the appeal of it. Were they responsible for punitives? Were the punitives excessive? All of those things. But we in wrongful death cases, in civil rights cases, we value, you know, the way that we assess the value of the case is the same way that we would any other wrongful death case. The thing you have to think about when you're talking about government entities is the self-insurance, you know, what amount of insurance. It's not a corporation that may be richer than some cities. I know people like to compare verdicts, but you know, you look at the Minneapolis, because they've been doing the Minneapolis settlement and then the Kentucky settlement or Louisville settlement, but Minneapolis budget is $1.2 billion more than the city of Louisville. So you have to take that into consideration. And with that being, I'll pass it over to you if you wanted to add anything.
Now, I would say this, and you know, this goes back to what Daryl and I just learned through the years. Lonita and Sam were great at breaking down the technical arguments. And, you know, I just came in talking about the value of a Black woman's life and how this was not like any other case and it was not going to be marginalized. And we continue to say that. I know sometimes Daryl and I have been accused of being crazy because we were asking for numbers that the white people in the room were just like, hey man, where have Black people ever got this amount? And so CK, where we rationalize just because it has not happened doesn't mean it should not happen. And I remember Lonita, you know, Sam kept saying, they scared of you, Ben. Lonita was doing her best to keep us all together. Me and Sam, we were just going for them. I was like, you know, we don't really care if you ain't gonna say that you come back at this number, because they were trying to get us in low brackets and everything. I think one of my texts to him was like, that's ridiculous. And, you know, at that point, he didn't want to text me no more. When he was talking about the brackets, he started texting Lonita and Sam. But it was one of those things that you almost had to convince them that a Black person was worth this much. They had trouble. And Lonita, I don't know, you can speak to it. You know, I see things through, you know, civil rights binders all the time. I can't see differently. Do you think it was because it was a Black woman, or Louisville just didn't have the budget that other cities had?
I mean, we're always going to have the, you know, because a Black woman or a Black male, that's always going to be a factor. But Louisville is not as rich as a Minneapolis, as a New York City, you know, as to where you've seen those larger verdicts. And as I said, in this case, Breonna has the largest settlement in the city of Louisville ever, from the city of Louisville, regardless of race. So not even just a civil rights claim, but in any civil suit against the city, period. So regardless of race. So I do think that when we say where we were able to come out on settlement, that we push beyond those, you know, and it was our representation, our aggressiveness that pushed beyond those racial bounds in terms of the settlement.
And the only other thing I'll say on that point is I think you have to have a leader who cares about legacy. I do think the mayor, who's a billionaire, and he's president of the United States Conference of Mayors, I kept talking about how this will be his legacy. And even though I think his city attorney and others did not want to pay that amount, you had a advocate saying, hold on, this is about our legacy. And I think that played into it as well, Lonita.
You know, it's been my experience that not only when I was practicing, but when I was a chief administrator and involved and named in various lawsuits involving police misconduct, automobile accidents, you name it. Settlement decisions become business decisions, and folk respond and they do what is in their best business interest. What I am so happy about with your settlement of this particular case is that you went beyond simply the business concern of it, and you talked about and you drove police reform and accountability. And it's not until we have that sort of systemic impact will we move the needles. You know, settlements are great for the individual clients that you're representing, but too often communities then are left in the same situation that they were in when the wrongful act occurred. So you're to be applauded for those efforts and an attempt to bring about comprehensive reform and move the needle.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we are unfortunately going to be bringing this program to a close, and there are a lot of questions. And I'm going to give each of the panelists a moment to give some closing thoughts, but I'd like to give some takeaways to our audience. We've got on this panel some super trial lawyers who've been trained by the best. And again, many of us stand on the shoulders of Willie Gary, Lorenzo Williams, Johnny Cochran, and others. But one of the lessons that I hear from Lonita Baker and from Ben Crump is you really have to be a trial lawyer when you're approaching these cases. That means you have to be aggressive. You have to do strategies that are creative to move the ball. So as opposed to allowing the criminal process to take place, Lonita jumped on the civil part of it because she was able to get some discovery and to begin a process that worked to her advantage, and ultimately allowing her to settle the case and her team to settle a case that really has a historic value, where she had to not just get compensation for the family, but do good for the community with policing reform. That's what makes this case unique. Many of us have settled at extraordinary settlements, hundreds of millions. I've been blessed to have that. But it is the programmatic aspect of it. In this case, the policing reform that makes it historic. And for that, the strategy that was employed by Lonita Baker, by Ben Crump, by their team is to be applauded and legendary. For those of you interested in this work, understand you got to wake up early in the morning and not be traditional in your approach, because they will have studied you and will know the tactics that you're going to use. That's number one. Secondly, be mindful that the police unions are working overtime to undo everything that you're doing. Remember what we heard Chief Clarence Williams say about being creative, pushing the envelope, being aggressive, holding accountable, using the political influence, because all of that together is what could ultimately bring about the type of resolution that we see here. We see some of our other national bar lawyers who are extraordinary. Chris Stewart in Atlanta and throughout the country, pushing the envelope. Many of you work with Chris Stewart on this panel, and we keep him and his family in our prayers, because we know, like all of you, there are people who threaten you when they know that you're about to bring about change, especially when you're challenging police and law enforcement. Also, remember the lessons that Daryl Parks taught us, or has spoken to today, about being creative, about leaving no stones unturned, about looking at all of the federal as well as state options that you have. And then finally, before I give each of the panelists a chance to wrap up, be bold and dare to be that first one, as Lonita Baker was, as this young woman under 40 was, to make a difference that will set an example in this country and in the world. So we thank you for that, Lonita. We thank you, Ben. Daryl, we thank you for always being there too. Clarence Williams, Police Chief, we thank you for giving the insight. And now I'm gonna ask the Police Chief to give just—
No, can I go first? I gotta go.
Okay, then Ben, give us some closing thoughts that you want this audience that's comprised of lawyers and non-lawyers to remember.
Just very briefly, I just think the National Bar Association has the greatest lawyers in America. And I don't even want to start calling names because I'll leave somebody out. But I always try to have Black lawyers included in every case I work and so forth. And for every Breonna Taylor case, there are 50 other cases that are not going to turn out that way, but they are just as worthy of our representation and consideration. We can't be like our white brothers and sisters and say, because they don't have the headlines of the news, that their lives don't matter. Our Black people need our Black lawyers and judges to give them a voice. We have to make a more just America, that Breonna Taylor has the opportunity to sleep in peace. George Floyd has an opportunity to breathe. Ahmaud Arbery has an opportunity to run free without being lynched. It's about all of our children having an equal chance at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what the National Bar has to be about. And I know my good friend, Senator Kamala Harris, who's a Black lawyer, NBA member, we have to continue to come up with innovative ways to be able to solve problems that have never been solved in our history, to respond to how they're killing us outside the courtroom in these high-profile cases. But President Hoffler, I never want people to forget, as I wrote about in my book, how they kill us softly every day in courtrooms in every city, every state, all across America with these trumped-up felony convictions. So our people need us now more than ever in the era of Trump.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben Crump. Clarence Williams, Police Chief Clarence Williams, or Chief Williams.
Thank you so very much, President Hoffler. And again, thank you for the opportunity. And I hope our listening audience was able to glean some nuggets of information from the discussion. I know I did, and it is certainly exciting to be among such heavy hitters in the legal profession, including yourself. Again, let's not forget that for each and every individual settlement that there are and that we are successful in accomplishing, that there are thousands of persons who are still not receiving the justice that they're entitled to. And across the board, and it's a heavy lift, ladies and gentlemen, but police reform, we have to attack it at all three legs of that three-legged stool that I talked about. And until we start impacting the very laws and standards that make it easy, yes, I said easy, for police officers to do the things that they do and not really feel threatened by the consequences, they're going to continue that activity until we are able to regain civilian control of the Army through civilian review, getting involved in the union negotiations, forcing politicians to disclose if they take monies from police unions and then vote on the very things that that are opposed to our seeking justice. And then third, of course, the training aspects of it. Let's stay vigilant in that, and remember that that is the least resisted arm of that, or leg of that three-leg stool as far as the industry is concerned. They'll give you that, but it's those other things that we need to have so that we have a balanced stool. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Chief Williams. Daryl Parks.
Thank you very much. Earlier, I mentioned the fact that our committee and police brutality committee was working on issues of body cam, dash cam, qualified immunity, but there are three other things that our president has us working on that the committee has deemed a priority as well. One is youth education. And as you know, the Bar Association has a strong history going back to past President Demetrius Shelton, and as things you need to know as you turn 18, and then other presidents who built on that, and the current president, CK Hoffler, has decided to make that a priority, youth education. So we will continue to work on that. Also, as you heard Ben talk about the many cases that are out there, the Bar Association is going to focus on a rapid response and PR to bring attention to all of those cases. So to the members who are on this call, to the extent you hear of issues, concerns, or things that are going on, because there's no way that we can monitor all of it, you should let the National Bar know. Call headquarters, contact the president, let them know that these issues are going on. Because as y'all know, as we travel, a lot of us are traveling by car right now. There are a lot of things going on out there in the world that we need to be made aware of. And then lastly, joining in with what the chief said about the training, we also plan on focusing on use of force. The committee has decided to tie those two issues together, training and use of force, as a committee look at it. So we're excited about working. We've always had one goal, as Ben and I did our work at Parks and Crump, was to make America a little bit safer. And I think we all will agree that all of us as Black lawyers are continuing to make America just a little bit safer, that if some Bubba decides that he wants to do something bad, he should know that there are lawyers like y'all waiting to put their names on the lawsuit with the city or entity they represent. And I'll tell you one thing, nothing gets an officer's attention like his name being on the lawsuit. So y'all go get him.
And then finally, I'm going to leave the final word to Lonita Baker, but Lonita, before you speak, because we're going to close it up with you, I just wanted to remind the NBA and those who are listening that we have 3 pandemics. This is egregious and awful, but remember, we have election suppression. Remember, in less than 45 days, we have a presidential election, and the National Bar Association is the leader in providing Black lawyers, over 5,000 Black lawyers, in the election protection effort, the nonpartisan election protection effort. We want you to join. We have formed partnerships with the AKAs. They're providing over 800 members that will serve as election protection lawyers. The Alphas, Daryl Parks on the line, your frat brothers, they are engaged, and we have a historic partnership with them that we're inking as we speak. The Kappas, the same as the Kappas. The Kappas said they are going to outdo in terms of the numbers of their members that will be part of the election protection what the AKAs have. We're waiting to hear back in terms of the details from the Omegas and some of the other Divine Nine. But I just want you all to know, ladies and gentlemen of the National Bar, we're on it, we're leaders, and we are standing up to fight. So the final word goes to that heroine, that magnificent young woman who put everything into this case and who was so instrumental in this magnificent settlement, not just monetary, but programmatic, Lonita Baker.
Thank you. And I do want to take a point of personal privilege and say, look at those women of Alpha Kappa Alpha leading the way on those voting election protection initiatives. So those of us sorors, and I am happy that we are leading that effort. Final words. So when you take on these cases, we have to be strategic. And one thing that was important to me was to try to do what I could. And luckily I had the support of my client, because if she didn't care about reform, guess what? I couldn't sit and think about reform. But I had a client who did care about reform. So we do have to be creative because the goals, we've seen making cities pay isn't making them stop killing our black men, our black boys, our black girls, our black women. We're still getting killed. So just making them pay is not enough. And the only way we're going to do it is if we actually change the laws. That's the laws as it relates to qualified immunity, the law as it relates to body cameras. Why do all of these departments have body cameras, but they're not activated the cameras? They need to activate it, and there need to be significant penalties if they're not activating those body cameras. Somewhat I saw in the Q&A, and I'm going to address that as I conclude, about the reform. It was asked that, did we come up with the reforms ourselves? No, we actually engaged experts, police experts, criminal justice experts. Luckily, I could draw on my background as a criminal defense attorney, criminal defense and prosecutor attorney. So we really did pull resources to come up with reform, and not just those experts, but we also listen to the things that the community is saying. Our budget was not cut for the police department, but one of the things we were able to negotiate as part of the settlement was that the police department would fill some of those vacancies or use the drug forfeiture money to hire social workers to be dispatched on runs where they're needed, for mental health crises. The community policing initiatives, the volunteering in your communities, the search warrant overhaul. We were also able to draw on, unfortunately, prior cases that we've litigated against the city to know what problems continue to show up in Louisville Metro Police Department. So that's why we negotiated the early warning system program that the city has to implement to determine whether officers have the red flags on officers, because one unsubstantiated civilian complaint may not be a problem, but 5 may show a pattern and a problem. So that's what those early warning signs. So I'm not going to go through all of the reform, but we engaged experts to help us with that reform, to draft the reform, and we're not stopping there. We're also, aside from the case, proposing legislation to the state of Kentucky for our General Assembly when they meet in January. So we have to change the laws. I'm a civil litigator, but I don't want to, I would love to not have to do civil rights because they're not violating our civil rights. And the only way we're going to get there is to change those laws.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our audience. The question was raised, is this recorded? Will it be available? Yes, this has been recorded. And yes, it will be available to our members. And just remember the Portuguese expression, a luta continua, vitória é certa. The struggle continues and victory is certain. Thank you all and have a blessed weekend.
Thank you.